Ponce de Leon. Yeah, so once he came out here, we can stop here for just a sec, guys. I want to talk about some stuff out here. Ponce de Leon came out here, found that it didn't have gold, but what he was enamored by was how young all the natives looked, how healthy they looked, and when they said how old they were, he baffled them. So they came up with a story to get rid of them, that they knew where the Fountain of Youth was. And so they just got rid of him by just saying, hey man, if you leave the eastern coast here, go around the southern part of the state, come up around the other side, the Fountain of Youth's over there. You can go find it, I promise. They gave him a general area where it was at. It's a complete lie. All of it was a complete lie. It worked. So he left, went around the southern part of the state, and he eventually ran out of fresh water. So he had to go up the first river he came to come into the state to get out of all the brackish water until it turned fresh. Now he started to notice a ton of sharks in this river. Now, does anybody have any idea of what species of shark that would be in fresh water?
Bull.
You got it, brother. Bull sharks. Tons of bull sharks, because it was their time for mating, their time for having their pups, having their babies, right? So they were all up in the river, and they do this in fresh water. And the babies live in fresh water for a little while. And then, so he noticed a surplus of them, not just one or two, but a surplus of bull sharks, and he started calling it Shark River. And the farther and farther he went up, he kept noticing sharks. So the center of the state ended up being called Shark Valley due to Ponce de Leon. It's also not much of a valley, but by definition, it technically is. The coasts are about between where you're at, only 50 to 100 feet higher than the center of the state. This is the flattest state in the U.S. It's not one of the Great Plains states, which surprises some people. But that is because it was stretched when Pangea separated, and Florida was actually part of Africa, and it pulled off of Africa and stuck onto North America at one point. So it was stretched out really thin. Now, we have the River of Grass, guys. It's gorgeous, right? There's not a whole lot to it, but I promise we're going to have a really good appreciation for the River of Grass later. And technically, most of the Everglades, especially during the wet season, is technically a river. The water is flowing through the entire Everglades. It only moves about a quarter mile a day, though. So it's the slowest moving river in the world. And at some points, it can technically be the widest in the wet season. A lot of people don't recognize it as a river, but like I said, by definition, it technically is. And I want to show you guys the sawgrass here. Give you guys an idea kind of what this is like. I like to get a really scratchy one. Find one here that's real scratchy. This one's probably good enough. Yeah. Alright, so, sawgrass. This is a type of sedge. We like to say sedges have edges. Okay? You're going to notice 3 distinct edges to this grass. You're only going to want to stroke it upwards. If you stroke it downwards, it'll prick you a little bit. You guys can pass that around and get a feel for it. So, if you can't stroke sawgrass downwards, can you imagine walking through the sawgrass? Every step is going to be tearing. It's not tearing into your flesh, but over time, it's going to wear through your skin. It's going to be pretty bad. It's going to be horrible. So these natives, just covering a few miles in a day, you can imagine it's not going to be so great. And there's usually not enough water out here for them to actually use their canoes. So they would have to walk next to their canoes and have their children and their supplies in the canoes. So that's kind of a synopsis of what we call the River of Grass. Luckily, sawgrass is one of the few things that's thriving out here that is not invasive as well, so we love to see that. I always like to start the Native American history when Andrew Jackson became president. It's my favorite time to talk about. It's not a good time in American history, and in my opinion, it's one of the biggest sores on American history that we have. So, Andrew Jackson becomes president after spending a little bit of time down in Florida when he was a military man. He never grew an appreciation for the Everglades. He hated it. He saw it as a huge eyesore, a huge thing that we need to overcome and conquer to be able to use Florida to our advantage. Now, one of the first things that he signed in, I think it was like one of the first 3 things he signed in, was the Indian Removal Act. And that told every single Native American in the southeast part of the country, particularly Florida, that we have created a reserve for you guys out in Oklahoma. You guys can go and walk to Oklahoma and go to this new land that we have for you. Could you imagine walking from here to Oklahoma? You think you're going to make it? No, I'm not going to make it. Well, about 80% of them didn't make it. It became the Trail of Tears. You guys have probably heard of that. So Andrew Jackson's the originator of the Trail of Tears. Okay. So he also said at that point, any of you natives that decide not to leave, you have essentially declared war on the U.S. at that point. Which seems kind of backwards, right? It's more like he declared war on them. But that's how he put it. So the natives were up in the northern part of Florida for the most part at this time, both the Miccosukee and the Seminole tribes, the 2 tribes that we have here. Now, they were slowly pushed farther and farther south until they ended up right where we're standing today, on these little islands in the Everglades. And this is kind of where everything came to a halt in the war. Early on, the military was doing a good job of eradicating a lot of the natives, pushing them farther and farther away. But once they got here, everything, like I said, just came to a grinding halt. You would have 1 or 2 families on these little islands, hiding. And as like I said earlier, nobody on that trail knows we're here right now, as long as we stay quiet, right? So the only time they would have to worry about giving out a signal is when they had a fire going. So then when they had a smoke signal up, they would have a couple of people looking out from their islands and looking for the military. And as you can also imagine, you can see the military from miles away with how flat it is out here, and they're going to take hours to get to you from the time you see them to the time they get here. So they had plenty of time to make a plan, and they usually did one of 2 things whenever the U.S. military found them. They would either use guerrilla warfare, which is essentially like Viet Cong used, where they would hide in little pockets, have traps and things set up, and they would attack them that way, ambush them. Otherwise, they would just leave and go hide and just not be here when the U.S. military got here. Now, the U.S. military would usually burn down everything on their island while they were there, just to be a nuisance to them. So they did like to do they liked to ambush them more so to try to keep everything they had intact. But you rinse and repeat this for a long time, guys, and the U.S. military is struggling. They don't have the capabilities to survive out here, and they're just getting supplies from the U.S. military, who doesn't understand the Everglades. They don't understand how to help people survive out here. So they're getting tons of disease. A lot of them are getting like trench foot, like what people got in World War I, where your feet are wet for days and days and days. And it's a very serious thing to have happen to you. So a lot of them were getting super sick. A lot of them were dying, famine. We weren't, supply chains were struggling because you'd have to go back to supply depots and then come back. And it was extremely difficult for me around. This is before we had all the big tanks and things and all the planes and everything that we could bring out here and do everything to easily be able to get to them. So the U.S. military pulls out eventually. And they hired a bunch of bounty hunters, which was even bigger disaster for them. They just hired a bunch of individuals to go out and try to do what they were trying to do by themselves. Didn't really work, but if they did get any natives, they got $50 for every scalp that they brought back. So they would just have to carve off the top of the scalp of the Native American, throw it in a bag, and show it to the military to get their wages. Now, this didn't go too well. Most of them didn't really get many at all. And now we kind of fast forward to the time when we're dealing with Fidel Castro out in Cuba, and we're kind of at the fight on communism, right? Throughout the early and mid-1900s, it had kind of come to a standstill out here with how the war effort happened. We felt like we eradicated enough of the natives to start building Miami up and these other cities, and they were out here and they weren't bothering us and we weren't bothering them. So there was no really effort to do anything. Now the Seminoles, whenever the U.S. military moved out, asked for their sovereignty. Were instantly given their sovereignty from the U.S. government. The Miccosukee people asked for the same thing. They were not granted this because they had recently broken off from the Seminole tribe within the last 100 years, just because they wanted to keep some more of those standard traditions alive that the Seminoles didn't care to, because they were assimilating to U.S. culture slowly but surely. So they told them they could basically kick rocks if they wanted to have their own sovereign nation. So the leader of the Miccosukee people, and this is my favorite part of the story, it's super cool, he was smart enough to know how much we didn't like Fidel Castro and how much Fidel Castro didn't like us. So he jumped on a boat and went to Cuba. And he went to go meet with Fidel Castro. And he told him exactly what happened. And so Fidel's like, so wait, you're meaning to tell me that my enemy has completely thrown this entire civilization of people off to the side? We're making this national news right now. So he did. And not only that, he decided to give the Miccosukee people everything that they wanted in the U.S. in Cuba. And so whenever the Miccosukees landed back in Florida, they basically had the U.S. military and U.S. government on their knees saying, please cut all of your ties with Cuba. You just made us look terrible on the world stage. We'll not only give you what you asked for, we'll give you more than you asked for if you guys will come and stay back. So they backed the U.S. government into giving them more than they ever asked for. Extremely intelligent, and for a native person who's living the lifestyle that they were living out here, to have the wherewithal to go and do that and beat the U.S. in a political landscape, that's insane. That's awesome. So since then, they only had about, I think they were down to around 100 to 150 people in their tribe at that point. They're now up to about 500 people in the tribe. And they all live right on the Tamiami Trail right out here, really close to where we do our airboat rides. Their whole villages are just right off the road. So they're slowly working their way up and thriving, and monetarily they're doing very well, which is good for them. The Seminoles are doing just a little bit better. I told them on the way in, but if you guys didn't know this, the Seminoles bought the Hard Rock brand out. So like the Hard Rock Casino there, the big guitar in Fort Lauderdale and all that stuff, they own that. And every single Seminole person gets a $200,000 check to start the year. That's how successful the native tribes are right now. So if you've ever watched Yellowstone and you see the stuff between the native leader that's trying to buy back his people's land, that's real. That is 100% happening. And everything's for sale in the U.S. If you got enough money, you can buy it. And so they are trying to buy back everything that they lost. It's a pretty cool story, and I'm all for it, really.